"You're trespassing, Patricia." She didn't flinch. Her sunglasses reflected the splintered remains of the fence she'd just ordered a crew to rip out. "This structure violates Article 14B. It's non-compliant, unstable, and unapproved," she said, almost bored. I stepped over a broken post. "My grandfather built that fence when this land wasn't even part of Willow Ridge." She smiled. "And yet, here we are." That's when I pulled out my phone. "Your amendment? Passed without quorum. Illegal." Her smile twitched. "The city already confirmed the fence exceeds residential safety standards," I added. "Inspector Dale signed off this morning." A flicker of doubt crossed her face. She wasn't used to pushback, especially not from me. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. My name's Jordan Reyes, structural engineer and third-generation homeowner of the land Patricia just desecrated. She thought I was just another quiet resident with an old fence. She didn't know that fence was built with my hands, and my grandfather's. We built it together when I was 12. He was a World War II veteran with a shaky memory, 2 Purple Hearts, and a chest full of medals he never spoke about. That fence was his therapy, his peace. And when he passed, it became mine. We carved it with unit numbers and initials, stories he couldn't say out loud, but could chisel into wood. Each panel meant something. There's a crooked gate in the middle, squeaky hinges, rusted latch. Behind it is the orchard, my grandfather's pride. He grew pears, figs, plums, said feeding people was better than fighting them. That orchard isn't just trees, it's memory, it's therapy. It's where I take my nephew Noah. He's on the spectrum and doesn't do well in crowds. But in the orchard, he laughs, he breathes, he connects. Patricia didn't just order the destruction of a fence. She bulldozed my nephew's safe space. She trampled on a veteran's memory. She tried to erase a legacy she didn't understand. You'd think neighbors would be outraged. But in Willow Ridge Estates, the HOA is the law, and Patricia is the queen. People stay quiet, heads down. She runs it like a dictatorship with bylaws instead of batons. I'd seen her fine a man $300 over a lawn gnome, force a woman to repaint her door 3 times in 1 week. She thrives on fear, on silence. But this wasn't a door color. This was mine, and I wasn't going to back down. The violation notice came while I was traveling for work, 3 days warning before demolition. She cited a revised height limit and claimed the structure hadn't been filed properly. But she knew that fence was older than her rulebook. The truth? She'd been looking for a reason ever since I refused to vote her proxy in last year's board election. She used her position to push, through a quiet amendment, one that allowed retroactive citations. No vote from the homeowners, no legal quorum, just control. That's where she messed up. Because unlike most residents here, I don't just follow codes, I help write them. I could have ignored it. Let her take it down, file a complaint, play nice. But that's not what my grandfather would have done. And it's not what a licensed structural engineer does when someone lies about safety to justify a power move. So I started documenting, photos, survey records, signed permits. Even a time-stamped inspection from 3 years ago with city approval. Patricia didn't know it yet, but she'd started a war she was structurally unprepared for. She thought she could bury me in paperwork and bylaws. But I designed systems like hers for a living. I know where they crack and exactly how to bring them down, safely. Where are you watching from? Because this isn't just a story about a fence. It's about what happens when a bully meets someone with nothing left to lose, and a lifetime of precision on their side. She picked the wrong legacy to bulldoze. By the time the city inspector arrived 2 days later, Patricia had already begun spinning her narrative. She called an emergency HOA meeting, not in the clubhouse, but in the cul-de-sac in front of my house. No official agenda, no minutes, just chairs in a circle, and Patricia standing dead center like it was a sermon. She pointed to the pile of broken wood, like it was evidence of my negligence. This is what happens when structures are left unchecked. Unsafe, non-compliant. Jordan's fence posed a danger to the community, and I took decisive action. There were about 20 neighbors there. Some of them looked uneasy, a few nodded, most said nothing. And that silence, that was her power. She ruled by exhaustion, by fear, by making everyone afraid they'd be next. I stayed behind the property line, arms crossed, watching. She wasn't speaking to me. She was performing, reframing a violation as a victory. But I saw someone shift behind her, Marcus Landry, HOA treasurer, friend of hers supposedly. He kept looking back at the orchard, at what used to be the fence. His jaw was tight, arms folded like he wanted to say something, but couldn't. Jordan was notified of this violation well in advance, Patricia continued. And let's be honest, none of us want this neighborhood to start looking like a farm. That's when I stepped forward, calm, controlled. I spoke just loud enough for everyone to hear. There are 5 separate inspections certifying that fence is structurally sound. I have 3 years of time-stamped survey data. And the orchard, I pointed, was in place before this HOA was incorporated. Murmurs, movement. A neighbor, Renee Porter, raised a hand. Wait, the orchard came before the HOA? Patricia snapped. It's irrelevant. Regardless of history, all properties must comply with current codes. Except they don't. Not retroactively, not without due process. And Patricia knew it. She pivoted fast, as always. This isn't about trees. It's about safety and leadership. But her voice had a wobble now. The performance was cracking. The meeting disbanded in awkward waves. People shuffled back to their houses without clapping, without talking. No one looked at Patricia, but Marcus stayed behind, watching me. I caught his eye. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. Later that evening, I walked through the community park. I needed to clear my head, figure out how far Patricia was willing to push this. And I wasn't the only one thinking. I found Renee sitting alone on one of the concrete benches, arms folded across a tattered cardigan. "She's not going to stop," she said before I even sat down. "You humiliated her." I nodded. I didn't even say half of what I could have. "She bulldozed history," Renee murmured. "I used to bring your grandfather canned fruit when he was building the fence. Watched you two carve those boards," her voice cracked. "This neighborhood used to be community. Now it's compliance." I stayed quiet, just listening. Then she looked me dead in the eye. "Don't let her win. Whatever it takes." That's when I realized this wasn't just about me. Patricia's obsession with control had taken things from everyone. Peace, privacy, pride. My grandfather's orchard was just the latest casualty. But maybe, just maybe, it could be the last. 2 days after the cul-de-sac meeting, I received a letter. Not certified, no, HOA header. Just an unmarked envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a copy of the revised amendment Patricia had used to authorize the demolition. This time, with margin notes, handwritten, highlighted, circled inconsistencies. The envelope wasn't signed, but I recognized the handwriting. Marcus. The notes were careful, but damning. An asterisk next to the section citing retroactive code enforcement with a scribble. Never voted, never logged. A big question mark next to the quorum claim. And at the bottom corner, barely legible. Check section 6.5, vote count never reached threshold. I stared at the paper for a long time, sitting at my kitchen table, rain tapping against the windows like static. Marcus wasn't just conflicted. He wanted me to know the truth. He just didn't want to be seen giving it. That night, I drove to the community clubhouse. Patricia had called another closed-door board session. Residents weren't invited, but board members always arrived early to use the gym or grab coffee. I knew Marcus would be there. I waited in the parking lot, watching through the windshield as he stepped out of his car. Black sweater, khakis, folder in hand. His walk was clipped, mechanical, like someone trying hard not to draw attention. I stepped out casually. "Evening." He jumped, slightly, then forced a smile. "Jordan, you're not supposed to be here." "I'm not inside," I said. "Just had a question." His eyes darted around. "I have about 5 minutes." We stepped around the side of the building near the maintenance path, half lit, quiet. The smell of chlorine from the indoor pool leaked through the vents. "I got your envelope," I said. He looked away. "Shouldn't talk here." "You already did," I replied. "You circled every lie in Patricia's playbook." He clenched his jaw, fingers tightening on his folder. "I didn't say anything. You understand?" "I didn't say a word." I get it, I said softly. You're stuck. She's got the votes. You speak out, you're gone. He exhaled, sharp and low. You don't know what it's like on that board. You think I agree with her? Half the time I want to scream. But she's got backups on backups, proxy votes, nepotism, and everyone's afraid of retaliation. I leaned in. You know what she did to my grandfather's fence? You know she crossed a legal line. His eyes flicked up. For a moment, I saw the weight behind them, like he'd been holding this rot in his chest for months. I've got a daughter with asthma, he said, changing the subject, or so it seemed. Patricia told us we couldn't keep our air filter unit in the window. Said it looked like a roach motel. You know what she did? Filed a violation, then made my wife cry during the appeal. He looked down at the folder. It's not just you, Jordan. She's been bleeding this place for years. I didn't press him. I didn't need to. The guilt on his face said everything. You're not the only one who remembers your grandfather, he muttered. He helped us rebuild our porch when we first moved in. Wouldn't even take payment, his voice cracked. You should have never had to defend that fence. For a second, he looked like he might actually stand beside me, but then his shoulders stiffened. He glanced toward the building. I've said too much, he whispered. You didn't hear this from me. And just like that, he was gone, back into the clubhouse, spine straight, expression unreadable. But he'd given me something important. Confirmation. That Patricia didn't have a quorum, that the amendment was a fraud, and more importantly, that someone inside the system wanted it to collapse. The violation notices started showing up the next morning. One was taped to my door, another tucked into the windshield of my truck, a third stuck to the mailbox like a scarlet letter. They were identical, bold red letters citing multiple infractions. Non-uniform mailbox color, unauthorized tree growth, failure to remove unpermitted structure. The fence was already gone. Patricia wanted blood now. I wasn't surprised. Retaliation was her language. She couldn't silence me, so she tried to drown me in paper. Cuts. Clara was furious when she stopped by that afternoon. She flagged the orchard now, my sister asked, waving one of the notices. What does unmanaged agricultural excess even mean? She made it up, I said. There's nothing in the bylaws about trees being too alive. Clara exhaled hard and looked over at Noah, who was sitting cross-legged under one of the pear trees, humming to himself. He cried this morning, she said softly. Told me the orchard was broken. Said he didn't want the quiet to go away. That hit harder than any notice. I knew Patricia's game. This wasn't about fences or fruit trees. It was about control, punishing me for embarrassing her in public. But she'd made a mistake, because the more she pushed, the more eyes started opening. Renee stopped by later with a basket of plums. She didn't mention the notices, but I saw her glance at each one, her mouth pressed into a thin, silent line. I remember when Patricia moved in, she said finally. She complained the first week about the color of the sky. Should have known then, I laughed dryly. She's escalating. Trying to provoke me into a mistake, Renee lowered her voice. Then don't give her one. Stay calm. Show them what she is by what you're not. I nodded. I was angry, but I wasn't reckless. I was an engineer. I knew how to apply pressure slowly. That's how you bring down faulty structures, one crack at a time. That night, I sat down with all the notices and started cataloging them. Every violation, every timestamp, every photo. I opened a fresh spreadsheet and began cross-referencing them with sections of the HOA bylaws. Most of them had no legal grounding. Some referenced sections that didn't even exist. Sloppy, lazy, emotional. She wasn't expecting me to respond with structure. She wanted a meltdown, a scene, a Facebook rant. What she got instead was a comprehensive audit. At 11:03 p.m., I got an email. It was a formal PDF of every infraction she'd filed, 11 in total. I scrolled through the list, then stopped at the final entry. Item number 12, non-conforming sentimental display. Violation level, level 2, aesthetic deviation, recommended action, permanent removal. She was targeting the carvings now. The initials, the badges, the panels we saved from the old barn my grandfather had rebuilt after the fire. She wanted to erase all of it, not just the fence, but the meaning behind it. I stared at that line for a long time. My hands were cold, my jaw clenched. The anger wasn't loud anymore. It was quiet, focused, cold in a way that made me feel sharper. Patricia didn't understand that I live in systems, in blueprints, in failure points and friction loads. She was an HOA tyrant with a clipboard. I was a structural engineer with a reason to fight. I clicked open a blank document and titled it, Formal Engineering Dispute Submission, Reyes v. Willow Ridge HOA, if she wanted. Escalation, I'd give her one. Measured, legal, relentless. And this time, I wasn't just defending what was left. I was coming for what was taken. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of my property with a clipboard in one hand and a measuring wheel in the other. Not for show, for record. I'd done this kind of walk dozens of times on job sites, industrial zones, seismic retrofits, government buildings. But this was personal, and the stakes were different. As I mapped every boundary, every anchor point, I realized something strange. The demolition crew had gone beyond the fence line, by at least 2 feet in some sections, 3 in 1. I paced it again, rechecked my reference marks, even measured from the irrigation piping beneath the orchard's edge. Same result. The fence hadn't just been removed, it had been torn down past my property line. That's when something clicked. I pulled up the original survey scan from my files, the one from the city's archive when my grandfather updated the deed in 1997. And there it was, a clean eastern boundary matched by a concrete footing poured 26 years ago. Then I opened Patricia's updated plat map, the one she attached to the violation letter. It showed a different boundary, narrower, tighter, and wrong. She'd redrawn the lines. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Mislabeling happens all the time with amateur plat overlays. But then I noticed the pattern. The redrawn property line cut just enough into my parcel to justify the removal of the fence, and a portion of the orchard, and it had been submitted after the supposed vote on the amendment. I knew what this was now. It wasn't about safety, it was about land. She was shrinking my parcel by stealth, a fake line here, an updated map there, quiet manipulations buried under paper. I printed both versions, laid them side by side. One was real, legally binding, the other fabricated. A digital mock-up slipped into a violation letter and passed off as truth. Patricia didn't just overstep her authority. She falsified boundaries. That was more than HOA abuse. It was fraud. Later that day, I drove to a commercial job site across town, an elementary school retrofitting project I was consulting on. As I reviewed beam calculations, I kept thinking about my orchard. A colleague noticed my silence. "You good, man?" "Yeah," I muttered, "just working on a different kind of structure." That night, I got home and started drafting a formal boundary challenge. I wasn't going to bury the HOA in emotion. I was going to bury them in evidence. I pulled out my inspection gear from the garage, laser rangefinder, GPS marker, tripods. Then I flagged the old concrete footing line and began mapping everything precisely, position by position, foot by foot, no assumptions, no guesswork, just data. The kind even a hostile board couldn't dispute. And when I was done, I uploaded everything into CAD, overlaid both plats, again, and created a side-by-side visual. My lot, according to the county, hadn't changed in 40 years. Patricia's version shaved off nearly 300 square feet. I saved the file, labeled it Clean, Exhibit A, Unauthorized Boundary Alteration. I stared at the screen for a long time, my hands still dirty from measuring stakes and orchard soil. She tried to erase my fence, then the carvings, now the land itself. But this time, I had her cornered, with math, with maps, with state-certified documentation she couldn't wiggle out of. No emotions, no shouting matches in the cul-de-sac. Just steel-trap precision and state-backed definitions. She didn't know it yet, but her entire case had just collapsed under the weight of a few millimeters, and this time, I wasn't waiting for the next letter to arrive. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed with the image of Patricia's falsified plat lines burned into my brain. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them slicing through the orchard, like invisible blades cutting into my grandfather's land. At 2:17 a.m., I got up, went to the living room, and opened the old photo box from the hall closet, the one labeled Pop. Inside were Polaroids, some faded receipts, and a folded map of the original parcel boundaries, hand-drawn by my grandfather when he first petitioned the county to subdivide the lot. I laid it on the table beside the modern prints. The scale was rough, but the lines matched. He knew this land. He respected it. And Patricia was trying to carve it away like it was nothing but real estate. The sun hadn't even risen yet when I heard the front door creak open. I turned, and there was Noah. He was barefoot, still in his pajamas, holding a worn-out plush fox under his arm. "I couldn't sleep," he whispered. "The orchard's too quiet." I knelt beside him. "You want to go outside for a bit?" He nodded, and we stepped out together into the gray pre-dawn light. The orchard smelled like dew and old soil. Noah wandered toward the fence line, or what was left of it, and sat down beside one of the posts that hadn't been removed yet. He ran his fingers across the carvings, letters, shapes, symbols. Some of them faded, others still sharp. "Grandpa's stories are still in here," he said softly. "I remember some." I felt my chest tighten. "He said trees don't forget," Noah added, "even when people try to make them." I nodded. "That's right. They don't." And that was it. The moment. I wasn't fighting to win anymore. I was fighting because I couldn't let her erase him. Not from this place, not from us. By noon, I'd submitted my official boundary challenge. Certified, notarized, and CC'd to the city zoning office, county records, and the HOA legal desk. I attached full CAD overlays, survey coordinates, and structural photos. No legalese, just facts. I also included Exhibit A, the falsified map Patricia had inserted. It was a clean, surgical, strike no emotion, no personal attack, just mathematical truth attached to legal precedent and property law. But I wasn't done. I printed the documents and hand-delivered a sealed copy to the HOA Dropbox, knowing Patricia would be the first to open it. I wanted her to feel it, the shift in weight, the control slipping from her fingers. Later that afternoon, Clara called. "He's been asking if the fence is coming back," I swallowed. "It will, I promise. You're not just doing this for him, are you?" "No," I said. "I'm doing it for all of us." That evening, Renee came by again. She brought peach cobbler and a small worn envelope. "I thought you should have this," she said. "Your grandfather gave it to my husband when he passed." Inside was a faded photo of the two of them, my grandfather and Renee's husband, building the orchard fence, both grinning, sunburned, alive. On the back, in shaky handwriting, my grandfather had written, "Never let anyone steal what you've earned." I stared at it for a long time, then slid it into the front of my engineering folder, right behind Exhibit A. This wasn't just about holding Patricia accountable. It was about defending a boundary, not just of land, but of memory, of legacy, of peace. I was in, all the way. No shortcuts, no half measures. She wanted a fight wrapped in HOA bylaws. She was about to get a blueprinted siege. 3 days after I filed the boundary challenge, I got a text from an unknown number. Park. 7:30 p.m. South Bench. Come alone. No name, no punctuation. I knew who it was. At 7:29 p.m., I pulled into the far lot by the neighborhood's lower park trail. It was the least used part of Willow Ridge. Overgrown picnic area, broken water fountain, one rusted bench at the edge of the clearing. Marcus was already sitting there, hoodie up, shoulders hunched, folder in his lap. He didn't look up when I sat down, just handed me the folder. Inside were typed minutes, board meeting logs, email printouts, and at the very bottom, 2 proxy forms, signed with Patricia's handwriting. Both were dated the day after the amendment passed. "She added them late," Marcus said. "We only had 5 votes at the time. Quorum required 7. She waited until after the vote to backdate those 2 and make it look legit." I flipped through the materials, scanning for the codes. He'd highlighted them already. I didn't need to say anything. The proof was sitting right in my hands. "You could have buried this," I said. "No one would have blamed you." He sighed. "I almost did." We sat in silence for a moment. Distant traffic hummed like static. The trees rustled behind us. "She told me if I said anything, she'd pull the tax audit request on my business," he added quietly. "She doesn't even care if it's true. She just wants leverage. She's unraveling, I said. No, he corrected. She's scared. You humiliated her when you brought the city inspector in. She expected you to yell, complain, throw a tantrum, but you showed up with spreadsheets and boundary maps. That scared her more than anger ever could. He finally looked at me. I don't want to be part of it anymore. I don't want my daughter growing up thinking this kind of power is normal. Then help me end it, I said. He nodded once, firm. Everything in that folder is yours. Use it however you need to. He stood up to leave, then paused. One more thing, he said, fishing a flash drive from his pocket. Board group chat screenshots. She's been deleting them from the public record, but I archived them. You'll want page 17. He left without another word. Back at home, I plugged the drive into my laptop and scrolled through the chat export. Most of it was noise, gossip, calendar scheduling, HOA gripes. But then I found it. A message from Patricia to the board, dated 6 days before the demolition. If the orchard goes, the value of the vacant lot next door doubles. Reyes has no idea the subdivision boundary overlaps his irrigation zone. Once we clear the fence, I'll push for full easement reassignment. Legal will back us if no one fights it. My jaw clenched. It was never just about compliance. It was about money. She had a buyer, and the fence was in the way. That was the final piece. She forged a vote. She falsified a plat. And she was exploiting HOA power to increase the value of a property she stood to gain from. It wasn't just abuse. It was conflict of interest. Maybe even fraud. I compiled everything. Marcus's folder, the group chat screenshots, the survey overlays. One file, one system, one airtight sequence. I added one more note at the top. Structural and procedural violations summary. Reyes v. Willow Ridge HOA. Under that, I added the subtitle, Prepared for Board Review and Independent Legal Arbitration. Then I closed my laptop. This was no longer a backyard dispute. This was a case. And Patricia was about to see what happens when the truth arrives with timestamps, signatures, and a legally admissible paper trail. I started by building a wall, not a literal one. Patricia had already taken care of that, but a digital wall, a fortress of evidence, documentation, and procedural collapse. I called it the strike file. Inside were 5 folders. 1. Boundary evidence, the real survey maps, the false plat submitted by Patricia, and my geotagged photos. 2. Board misconduct, Marcus's meeting logs, the late proxies, group chat screenshots. 3. HOA bylaws versus action. Every violation notice matched against the written rules. Dozens didn't align. 4. Conflict of interest. Patricia's messages referencing the adjacent lot and its inflated value. 5. Structural integrity records. The inspection reports, load-bearing certifications, even video clips of me stress testing the orchard posts. But documents weren't enough. I knew from experience that even airtight systems could be ignored if no one understood the language. And Patricia counted on that confusion. She weaponized overwhelm. So I translated everything. Charts, infographics, visual overlays. If this was going to court, or even just a board showdown, I wanted the facts to hit like sledgehammers. I also wrote an executive summary in plain language. 1 paragraph per violation. 1 sentence per breach. Designed for impact. It read like a story. Because that's what it was. Patricia had cast herself as the enforcer. But now the roles were shifting. Once the strike file was done, I turned my focus to presentation. Literally, I built a slide deck. Simple, black and white, no fluff. Just headers like fabricated map evidence, undocumented quorum claims, retaliatory violation pattern. Each slide had one truth, one undeniable moment. When I finished, I stepped back from the screen and felt something I hadn't felt since this started. Momentum. She started this fight in secret, behind closed doors, through silent edits and forged authority. I was going to fight in the open, with clean lines, with math, with public exposure. I booked a consultation with a property law specialist, just 1 hour, virtual. I didn't need legal coaching, I needed confirmation. After reviewing the strike file, the attorney didn't blink. "This is rock solid," she said. "If this went to arbitration, she'd fold. If it went to court, she'd lose." I thanked her, ended the call, and added one more document to the file. Attorney consultation summary, supporting validity of evidence chain. I was ready to move, but first I had to prepare for the next move on her end. Because Patricia wouldn't wait to be confronted, I began quietly rebuilding the fence line. Not the whole thing, just a symbolic post. One of the originals that hadn't been destroyed. I set it in concrete, right where the old footing had been, and hung a small sign from it. Pending legal review, property boundary under formal. Dispute. It wasn't just a warning, it was a message. To Patricia, to the board, to every neighbor driving by. She wasn't dealing with a rule breaker. She was dealing with someone who understood structure. The next morning, I drove to the printer downtown and had 3 physical binders made. Hard covers, tabs, labels. One for me, one for Marcus, one for the board. The clerk looked confused. "Court case?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. By the time I got home, a new violation notice was taped to my door. I smiled. Of course she had. But this time, I took it down, scanned it, added it to the strike file under a new folder. Post-filing retaliation. Then I reopened the deck and added one more slide at the end. Escalation timeline, after legal notice delivered, dated, time-stamped, signed. The blueprint was in motion now. Patricia's empire was built on perception, on silence, on assumed compliance. But I was done being silent, and her house of cards was about to collapse, under the weight of math, law, and her own arrogance. I waited until Sunday. That's when most of the neighborhood came out. Kids on bikes, couples walking dogs, retirees tending their rose gardens. Willow Ridge always looked the most peaceful when its foundation was cracking the hardest. I started with the people Patricia had bullied longest. Mrs. Greer on Lilac Court, forced to repaint her shutters 4 times because Patricia said the shade of teal clashed with the sky. The Chens, who were fined for having excessive wind chimes. And of course, the couple who were told they couldn't hang their disabled son's ramp banner because it wasn't uniform. I didn't make speeches, no soapboxes. I knocked on doors with a folder in hand and a sentence ready. "Would you like to see what she's been doing in your name?" Most invited me in before I even finished. Some cried. One man offered me a beer and said, "It's about damn time." I handed out summaries, 2 pages each, clear language, highlighted sections of the bylaws next to her violations. I didn't ask for rebellion, I asked for signatures. By dusk, I had 36 homeowners who were ready to submit a formal call for board review and independent investigation. The requirement was 25. I submitted the petition through the HOA's online portal, time-stamped, signed by each resident, and backed it up with certified mail, return receipt requested. No deniability, no loopholes, no excuses. That night, Clara called me, voice shaking. She sent someone to the house. What? A man. Said he was from property compliance. He looked through the fence and took photos of Noah in the orchard. When I told him to leave, he said he was documenting unauthorized use of land under enforcement review. I froze. That was a line even Patricia hadn't crossed before. Is Noah okay? He's scared, Clara whispered. He thinks they're going to take the trees. I felt something go quiet inside me, the kind of quiet that only comes before a storm. This ends now, I said. The next morning, I called the city zoning office. I reported unauthorized enforcement activity on a disputed boundary, filed a formal complaint against the HOA for harassment, and requested a municipal observer for the upcoming board meeting. Then I called Marcus. She's spiraling, I told him. She's sending people to photograph my nephew. That's not enforcement. That's intimidation. I know, he said. She's trying to rattle you. She just confirmed everything I've built. You ready? His voice didn't hesitate. I've got my binder. And I've got 4 proxy votes who won't side with her once the file goes public. Then we bring the house down. Over the next 48 hours, I printed community, copies of the evidence summary, and prepared a separate version of the slide deck for display. I uploaded a digital version to a public Google Drive and shared the link on the Willow Ridge Neighborhood Forum. No commentary, no caption, just what they didn't want you to see. Within an hour, 10 residents had left comments. By that evening, it had been downloaded 60 times. I wasn't just taking on Patricia anymore. I was waking up an entire neighborhood that had been ruled by silence and fear. That night, I returned to the orchard with Noah. We replaced 2 of the fence posts together. He helped me hold the level, and I let him hammer the base pegs. "Grandpa would have liked this one," he said as he stood back to admire it. "Yeah," I smiled. "He would have." Then I lifted a wooden plaque we'd carved together that morning and mounted it to the post. "This land remembers. No lights, no cameras, just legacy, rebuilt by hand, one panel at a time." By the time we finished, I had the entire strike file packaged, duplicated, and delivered to every board member's mailbox. Patricia would see it first, of course, but this time, the truth wouldn't be buried behind fences. It would stand tall, on record, on paper, and in front of every neighbor she'd ever silenced. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 6 p.m. in the community clubhouse. Patricia had moved it up by a week, likely hoping to get ahead of the fallout from the petition, the forum post, and the growing whispers in every corner of Willow Ridge. I spent the morning checking and double-checking everything. 3 printed copies of the strike file, 1 for the Municipal Observer, 1 for official record, 1 for presentation use. My laptop was charged, slides loaded, a thumb drive backup in my pocket, hard copy of the petition in a sealed envelope. Marcus texted me a simple message around noon. "We're set. 4 confirmed votes, 2 more leaning our way." I wrote back, "Truth hits at 6. At 4:45, I drove past the clubhouse. The parking lot was already half full. People weren't waiting for HOA donuts or budgeting line items. They were showing up for a fight. I headed home, changed into a button-down, tucked my engineering license into the inside sleeve of my portfolio, and packed the photo Clara had given me, the one of my grandfather building the fence. It wasn't just for me. It was a reminder of who this fight was for. By 5:30, I arrived early, as planned. Renee met me at the doors. "Half the neighborhood's here," she whispered. "Some are standing." I glanced inside. They'd set up extra folding chairs. Someone had brought a baby monitor to stream the meeting for elderly neighbors at home. A few teenagers hovered near the back wall, curious. Patricia stood at the head of the board table, flipping through papers with her usual tight smile. She didn't look worried. She looked rehearsed. But I had seen the gap in her foundation, and I was about to crack it open. Marcus caught my eye from the far side of the room. He gave the smallest nod. At 6:01 p.m., the meeting began. Patricia opened with the usual script, agenda items, upcoming landscaping changes, a vague mention of recent concerns circulating via unofficial channels. Then she invited any homeowners with new business to speak. I stepped forward. From the front row, Renee handed me the first binder. I placed it gently on the board table. Then I turned to the crowd. "My name is Jordan Reyes. I'm a licensed structural engineer, a resident of Willow Ridge Estates, and the owner of Lot 16B, the property recently targeted for retroactive violations and forced demolition." I opened the binder, slide by slide, speaking clearly, calm, no heat. On the screen behind me is the original county-registered boundary map of my property. The second image is the altered version submitted to justify the removal of a legacy fence that predates this HOA. A soft gasp rippled through the chairs. I kept going. Slide 3 contains meeting records, dated and signed, that show the amendment used to validate that demolition was passed without quorum and with proxy votes that were backdated after the decision Patricia tried to interrupt. But I held up a hand and said, "You'll have your response time." "I'm not finished." The room went silent again. I walked them through the retaliation notices, the harassment, the false aesthetic citations, the unauthorized photo incident involving my nephew, and finally, the chat log, page 17. I read it out loud. "If the orchard goes, the value of the vacant lot next door doubles." I looked at Patricia. "You didn't enforce a rule. You pursued a profit, and you used your position to silence anyone who stood in your way." A few board members looked stunned. One physically turned their chair away from her. Then I turned to the audience. For years, this HOA has operated under fear, under silence. But silence isn't compliance, and compliance isn't justice. I held up the photo of my grandfather. This fence was never just wood. It was memory. This land was never just property. It was earned. And no one has the right to rewrite that legacy. When I finished, I placed the final document in front of Patricia, my formal call for board review and independent arbitration. She stared at it. For the first time since this all began, she had nothing to say. The room didn't applaud. It just held still, like everyone knew something irreversible had just shifted. The silence after I finished wasn't awkward. It was charged, like everyone was waiting to see who would speak first, afraid that breaking the air might shatter something fragile. Patricia stood, slowly. She didn't touch the documents I'd laid before her, didn't look at the screen still glowing behind me with the highlighted quote about doubling the lot value. She cleared her throat, reached for the mic, then didn't use it. "This is a gross mischaracterization," she said, voice flat. "Mr. Reyes has taken private board matters, internal communications, and manipulated them for personal gain." Someone in the back laughed, not loudly, just enough. "Personal gain?" I asked, still standing. "I'm not the one hiding property investment interests from the people I represent." That cracked the room open. A woman near the front row stood up. "I voted for you, Patricia. I trusted you to protect the neighborhood, not destroy a man's fence for profit." More voices joined in. "He rebuilt that fence with his nephew. She tried to ban my welcome mat last month. Is this why we suddenly needed security cameras at the front gate so you could monitor who speaks out?" Patricia's eyes darted toward Marcus. "This is out of order." "No," he said. For the first time, his voice was loud, clear. "You're out of order." The room went quiet again. Marcus stood from his chair, lifted his binder, and placed it beside mine. I confirm everything Jordan just presented. I witnessed the backdated proxies. I raised concerns internally and was ignored. I remained silent out of fear. "That ends tonight." Gasps, murmurs. Patricia turned pale. "I move," Marcus said slowly, "that we initiate an emergency board review to remove Patricia Hensley from her position as HOA president, pending investigation into financial conflict of interest and abuse of authority." A beat of silence. Then, a second board member, Mrs. Farrow, raised her hand. "Seconded." Patricia's mouth fell open. "You can't be serious." But the vote had already begun. One by one, board members raised their hands, 4, then 5, then 6. Only Patricia's hand stayed down. The motion passed. She staggered back a step, as if the weight of the room had physically pushed her. For once, her voice failed her. The municipal observer, seated quietly in the back, stood and made a note in a small ledger. Renee walked up beside me. "That's it?" "No," I said. "Now the cleanup starts." Marcus stepped down from the table and faced the room. "As acting interim president, I move to restore the Reyes family fence under original specifications, at the HOA's expense. Furthermore, I will open a vote to formally amend the bylaws and prohibit retroactive enforcement on legacy structures without homeowner consent." More applause, real this time. And then Marcus surprised everyone. "I also propose we open a restorative discussion with residents. Every resident Patricia targeted, starting next week, is right here. And yes, that includes welcoming Mr. Reyes onto the Architectural Advisory Subcommittee. I didn't expect that, but I nodded. "It'd be an honor," I said. Patricia stormed out before the meeting officially ended. No goodbye, no denial, just silence and retreat. And when she was gone, something shifted in the room. People weren't just relieved, they were free. A man I barely knew clapped me on the back. A teenage girl said, "Your orchard smells better than any HOA lawn." Renee hugged me tight. "He'd be proud, you know." Your grandfather Marcus looked like a man who had taken off a weight he'd worn for years. He shook my hand firmly. "You didn't just win," he said. "You rebuilt something we forgot we even had." I looked around at the people gathering their things, at the neighbors who'd finally found their voices. It wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. They rebuilt the fence in 5 days. Not a contractor, not a crew. The neighbors did it. Marcus showed up with a set of borrowed power tools. Rene brought homemade lemonade and stayed all afternoon. The Chens planted new wildflowers along the base. Someone I barely knew from 2 streets over offered fresh stain and sealer, said they had leftovers, but I think they bought it just for this. And Clara, she came with Noah, who hammered in the first post. We carved the initials back together, my grandfather's, mine, and now Noah's too. 3 generations etched in grain, not hidden behind bylaws or buried beneath violations, visible, defiant, alive. Patricia never showed. After the vote, she submitted a formal resignation and removed herself from the board's contact lists. Rumor was she sold her shares in the undeveloped lot and moved in with her sister across town. No one threw a party. But no one missed her either. The board officially voted to nullify the amendment that started it all. They refunded my violation fees, restored the orchard's protected status, and posted a public apology on the HOA website. More importantly, they passed the bylaw Marcus proposed, permanently banning retroactive enforcement against pre-HOA structures unless approved by a supermajority vote and independent legal review. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was a start. For the first time in years, people started talking again. Not whispering, talking, on porches, in the park, at the community board that had once been empty but now overflowed with flyers for game nights, potlucks, garden swaps. Willow Ridge remembered itself. The orchard grew quieter after that, not in sadness, but in peace. The kind my grandfather used to talk about when he said a good day's work should echo in the soil. Noah went back to picking pears. He started calling the orchard Grandpa's place, and Clara didn't correct him. Neither did I. One night, just before sunset, I stood by the new post Noah had helped drive in and looked over the whole line of wood, stained, sealed, upright. We'd kept the original post, the one Patricia hadn't torn down, the one carved with Pop's old military insignias. It leaned slightly, still weathered, still imperfect. We left it that way on purpose. Some memories are supposed to be a little rough around the edges. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Because somewhere out there, another Jordan is staring down a clipboard tyrant. Another Patricia is rewriting rules in the dark. Another community is waiting for someone to stop staying quiet. You don't need a law degree. You don't need a megaphone. Sometimes all it takes is one person who won't let the past be bulldozed without a fight. I was just a guy with blueprints, but I knew how to find the cracks. And this time, I made sure the collapse was hers, not ours.